Multiversus is in a weird spot right now. After an open beta that received viral acclaim and several award nominations, the game burned out, shutting down the vacant servers, promising an eventual return, only to return a year later with a much worse feeling game that needed 2 whole seasons to find some sense of stability. And heading into the game's 3rd season, the word stability was the only one on my mind. I was hoping that by now we would have smoothed things out for a tight player experience. And to an extent, I got what I wanted. It's clear that we're making our way towards some sort of status quo for the game. With 2 seasons under our belt twice, we finally have a big picture idea of what I imagine the rest of the game's lifespan will look like. And it's kind of boring. It feels like outside of character reveals, the game doesn't have any idea how to keep people invested in the long term, and that's become incredibly obvious now that we're officially out of launch territory with player numbers dropping ever so slowly. And while the game's 3rd season hasn't exactly been an uneventful one, with a load of new stages, game modes, and the possibility of a new universal mechanic that could fundamentally alter this game's core, none of it was enough to change the fact that Multiversus Season 3 feels like filler. Multiversus' 3rd season is sugar, spice, and everything nice, and features, as you could probably guess, the PowerPuff Girls. And they're probably the most noteworthy thing we have to talk about today. And how could they not be? The PowerPuff Girls have haunted this fanbase for a while, from being a longtime fan favorite potential newcomer in the beta, to being teased in one of the first trailers for the relaunch, to finally headlining their own season. The pervasive question was, how would they make them work? Are Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup separate characters like in the old Cartoon Network fighting game? Are they slightly different takes on one base character like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Injustice? Do they switch out with each other like Pokemon Trainer and Super Smash Bros? No, they all fight together on screen at once. I was positively thrilled seeing their initial trailer. I was, and still am, really impressed with the animation, how cleanly it reads, the fact that depending on the girl leading the charge, you have a slightly different moveset. It's a genuinely inspired translation of the Powerpuff Girls that showcases them as a team while still keeping their individuality. The best of both worlds. These characters were just a little before my time. When I started to be fully conscious, Cartoon Network was more in its Chowder era, but this is like the first IP to come to this game post-launch that I actually had a meaningful pre-existing relationship with. So I gotta say, I'm pretty happy to see them here. This is the first time the game's intended marketing gimmick of including pre-established IP has actually worked on me since like Steven Universe in the initial trailer. And that didn't get me hyped as much as it did morbidly curious. And now I'm here making my 4th video on the game. Isn't that crazy? In-game, the girls feel a little clunky, as does every Multiversus character. They have a very high skill ceiling. In fact, when they first released, they were basically getting 0 to deaths off everything, and it does make them a little less rewarding to play when you don't know all the sauce. I'm not the most skilled player of this game. I only really jive with one character in ranked, so the PPG didn't feel best utilized in my hands. But that doesn't stop them from being one of the most anticipated, most well-implemented, and most interesting characters added to the game. And who better to be added alongside the most exciting character than what very might be the least exciting character in this game's repertoire? Nubia. Nubia is hard to talk about without talking about the circumstances of her release, given the fact that I, and I assume many of you, had never heard of this relatively obscure piece of DC lore before her addition to Multiversus. And suddenly, here she was, unfairly thrust into being one of the 3rd season's tentpole characters. Although, if you had been tuned into the leaking community for this game, you would have had a passing familiarity with Nubia, because much like the Powerpuff Girls, Nubia has also haunted this fanbase. Back in the 2022 beta days, she was data mined as a skin for Wonder Woman. Then slowly, update after update, she got patched to have more of her own moveset. The assumption for a while was that she was going to be an Echo Fighter kind of situation, but now she's here and we know that aside from sharing a few similar moves and a similar model to Diana, she is her own full-fledged character. And since I hated Banana Guard for being a character that nobody wanted in this game with a generic spear moveset made from retooled beta assets, you might think that I would hate Nubia for being a character nobody wanted in this game with a generic spear moveset made from retooled beta assets. But she's fine. I think it all comes down to context. Banana Guard was Season 1. Coming back from the relaunch, we all wanted big names, but instead we get the silly banana from Adventure Time, and worse over, their moveset doesn't even have any references to the source material. But now we're in Season 3! The game has cruised at a moderate pace for a couple months now, the vibe is generally a lot nicer than it was back then, and Nubia, while obscure, is an actual character, and not a background gag in a legion of thousands. lessons. As far as her moveset goes, in canon, Nubia is just kind of a fighter, the queen of the Amazons, so her having a generic fighter moveset that resembles the only other Amazon on the rosters is fine. Also, I didn't know who Nubia was beforehand, so even if she's not faithful, I can't be disappointed. Listen, is she my most wanted? No. Do I like playing as her? No, not really. Do I think it's crazy that this is the closest thing to a mainstream product this character has appeared in? Absolutely. But I also firmly believe in the power of weirdo picks for fighting games. It's almost standard that crossover fighting games will have at least a few characters that you've never heard of going in, and we can discuss all day whether or not Nubia was the best choice of a character to fill that role, especially when they should be adding higher profile characters to draw more players, but I have a hard time getting worked up about it like some people in the community seem to be. Always remember that every character you've never heard of is somebody else's fringe favorite. I see people saying that DC is to Multiversus what Fire Emblem was to Smash Bros, but you never heard those Fire Emblem Smash Bros fans complaining. They were always the happiest motherfuckers. And frankly, Nubia is the only character added since the relaunch that I've actually enjoyed playing. She's not my favorite by any means, but she clicked for me in a way better than anyone who came before her. I like her moveset. The spear move where you grapple to an opponent is particularly satisfying to hit, but she's just so slow, and not like intentionally slow like Iron Giant or Jason. Nubia feels like she's playing in slow motion. I have a hard time putting it into words, but it feels like everything comes out a full second after you expect it to, and because of that, she has probably the worst game feel on the roster, which sucks because she might be fun if she wasn't constantly playing in half speed. I wanna like this character, I really do. I love to champion the small, obscure characters that no one's ever heard of. After all, I play Min Min. But regardless of how poorly thought out her inclusion was in the first place, she just doesn't quite feel right. And in a game full of characters that I like more from both a gameplay perspective and within the context of their own universe, Nubia fails to leave an impression. And I imagine a lot of you feel the same way. Almost everything added in Multiversus Season 3 follows the same precedent set by our new roster additions. Remarkable highs and low lows. For instance, we have new stages. The delightfully charming Midnight Showing from the Gremlins, a destroyed variant of Townsville with a tiny platform in the middle, both with distinct visual elements that clearly had a lot of effort put into them, and alongside them, a handful of ugly stages ripped straight from the game's Rift mode. I get why they did it. It gets more mileage out of these assets originally made for Rift mode. They even made some of the sillier game modes from the Rifts playable in PvP with the Wacky Weekends queue, but man, these stages are butt ugly. I could ignore this if they were used exclusively for the random mini games or for the Rifts, but seeing them next to the actual stages leaves something to be desired. They finally added something substantial to the perk system after leaving it basically stagnant since launch, giving Garnet a new signature perk, and this is super neat. I like this idea of promoting newer playstyles for older characters without a significant rework. But then they randomly decided that the Last Stand perk was overpowered in its current state, so rather than nerf it, they removed it from the game completely. And I'm doubly annoyed about this one because the perk was so good that I had it equipped with all my guys, and instead of removing the perk from my loadouts, they just reset all of my loadouts that had the perk equipped, which was all of them, so I had to spend a while fixing that. The new events were fun thematically, and the associated cosmetics feel like they had a lot more effort put into them than last season's, but they also imposed a lot of new restrictions on how much event currency you can gain, and introduced a new elusive rarity to certain cosmetics to further promote the fear of missing out. I even gave a good faith attempt to do the Rifts again after dismissing them completely in Season 2, and in case you were curious, they're not better. There are more silly gimmicks at play, but the difficulty jumps are still atrocious, the grind for gem XP is still insane, and they still have really weird restrictions around what characters you have to play in order to bait you into spending money. Which, small tangent, but in the third Rift, they have a section of missions that can only be completed by using a skin from the Hypergalactic event, an event that I had to miss, so I couldn't play these missions. Last season, I could have mitigated these problems because all of the event currencies could be exchanged for each other, but for some reason, they got rid of that here. And it's like, This is one of those changes that only serves to make the game worse for the player. It may be a small thing, but it's cumulative, you know? Like this in combination with new characters coming out 3 days later for free-to-play players, the higher amount of filler items like gem XP in the battle pass, putting limits on how many items you can get with the event currency, and the fact that there are now permanent indicators on the character select screen for which characters have skins you can buy to get double XP sucks the soul out of the game a bit. It's been really upsetting to watch these unexpectedly kind gestures like free premium currency or being able to get event progress from matches against AI get scaled back more and more with every new update. To me, it feels like they want the kudos for doing nice things only to slowly peel it back and hope no one will notice that it's almost as bad as launch again. The rifts are still not my thing. I'm not built for this difficulty curve. The fact that we jump from not very challenging at all to none of my attacks feel like they're doing anything and every match takes 5 minutes because of it is crazy. Want my advice? Play Iron Giant in co-op with a dummy account, and because the dummy account will die frequently, you can spam the transformation and pray. Although I'm hesitant to talk about any of the random workarounds I've come up with to make the live service grind less miserable, lest they somehow see this video and patch it out like they have so many of the other smaller exploits the community has found. If they nerf Iron Giant in Rift mode, you'll have me to blame. But we'll also have soft confirmation that they're watching. In which case, hi Tony, I want Ted Lasso, Steven Universe in the pink jacket, and Ruby Rose. Make it happen. But by far the biggest new talking point for Multiversus' 3rd season was shields. New to the game this season was the Testing Grounds, a queue meant exclusively to feel out new features that the development team may or may not be adding. And for its debut, we have Super Smash Bros. Style shields proposed as a universal mechanic. And I don't like this. Multiversus has a lot of cheese that characters tend to take advantage of, and it feels like rather than address any of that on a case-by-case basis, they're just hoping shields will be a band-aid solution on what is otherwise a pretty spam-heavy experience. And I know that all of this is purely hypothetical, because for all we know, shields aren't ever actually going to be a thing, but at what point is this just a different game? I loved how Multiversus played when it launched. It was unwieldy, sure, but the way the characters moved with the constant dodging and the breakneck pace of it all really gave the game its own identity in the gameplay department, something I think other platform fighters struggle with. A lot of games fall into the trap of trying to be a Smash Bros. Alternative, more specifically a Melee alternative, but the thing is, Melee players only really play Melee. I've been in this community long enough to see tons of games try and be the Melee messiah away from Big Bad Nintendo, and every time they get hyped up for like a week before the community just goes back to their one game. And despite my criticisms, I think part of the reason Multiversus ended up being one of the more long-term successful attempts at this idea is because of those differences in the core gameplay. Don't get me wrong, I think it's cool that they're still experimenting with major game mechanics. I like that they added teching last season, but the fact that this game is still debating adding shields years out from its open beta, which was months out from the playtest I was initially playing, it paints a picture that there isn't really a coherent vision for this game's gameplay. Characters, skins, we more or less know that they have those on lock, but the actual game those characters will be implemented into, that's a work in progress. And that kinda scares me. Think of how many people we lost from beta to relaunch because of how the gameplay was reworked. People are still up in arms about things being too slow, and we're debating adding shields? When did shields become part of this conversation? Let's go back to the movement. I find the game's current state perfectly playable. I'm not amazingly offended by the slowdown of the beta's gameplay, nor do I think shields are an inherently bad idea, but can we fucking stick to something? Relearning muscle memory from the beta was annoying enough, and now I very possibly am gonna have to learn how to make shields work. It's times like this where I wonder, what exactly were they doing during the off-season? Because lest we forget, Multiversus was offline for the better part of a year to implement fixes from the beta. This is the supposed final product. Why does it still feel like a beta? The state of Multiversus has just been so unexciting as of late, but there is hope on the horizon, because Warner Bros. Just announced that Multiversus has been massively underperforming, like $100 million in the hole underperforming. And while I have my suspicions on how realistic their expectations were in the first place, given that this is the WB we're talking about, this could be the start of something big. Right as this news began to hit the internet, Multiversus announced their plans for Season 4, a longer season featuring 2 fan-favorite characters, reworks to character unlocks, a new mode with a load of customization options, 2 new battle passes, more high-effort events, 2 new stages for existing franchises, and all of it housed inside a roadmap, something us fans have been requesting for a while. I have reservations about being too hopeful. 2 battle passes on paper seems like it'll be messy, and a lot of this other stuff feels like the same things we get every season, except this time told to us in a new way, but it's clear that Player First Games isn't going down without a fight. And I'm kind of excited to see what a desperate PFG operates like. Marceline and Raven are 2 of the most popular characters from their respective shows, and those shows are cultural juggernauts in my corner of the internet. This will turn heads, and if the fighter road makes new characters more easily unlockable, that could mean a strong influx of new players. However, this goes both ways. If they announce that this Supreme Raven design is in the game on November 12th, and all the goth girlies log in only to find out that Raven's only available for premium currency and she'll be unlockable for free on the 15th, it'll be a disaster. The game's biggest weakness since Season 1 has been how unforgiving it is unless you devote all your time to it, and while they have made small steps towards fixing it with things like being able to unlock characters much cheaper through event currency, it's still a mind-numbing grind for free-to-play players. I'm skeptical, it feels like they've been skirting the line for a while, but if there was ever a time to bend over backwards for an audience, it would be now. It's make or break time, Multiverses. I'm rooting for you, please don't disappoint me, and we'll talk again when Marceline is playable. See ya!